Over the past 10 years, I've always had an idea of what my Grail watch is. It has changed over the years, but what hasn't changed is the fact that I've never owned any of them. And there's a couple of reasons why. The obvious one is the price of them. These Grail watches for me tend to be rather expensive watches, and that tends to stop me buying them. But there's a second reason, and that second reason has just happened to me again. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And for the past couple of years, I've had one watch in my head as my Grail watch, and that is the Grand Seiko White Birch. In fact, I think it was on the release of this particular watch, as soon as I saw pictures of it and started seeing videos about it, it became my Grail watch. And it remains my Grail watch. It is a beautiful watch that really captures my attention. I've tried it on a bunch of times and it really does capture my attention. It really is a beautiful watch. And over the past year or so, there's been a couple of moments where I've really considered buying it. I've considered buying it since that it has sort of come down in price on the used market. I've considered buying it since I've been putting some extra money into watches recently. I've also considered selling some of my watches, and between the price of it secondhand versus what I'm sort of raising in funds through a few different reasons, that I might actually buy it. But last time I went through this process, I realized at that time it wasn't the right watch for me. In fact, what I did was exactly what I did with all watches when I decide to buy them. I step back from that purchase and I look at everything else that is around and available and see if for around the same sort of money, is there a watch that I prefer over the watch that I'm particularly looking to buy. And this could be affordable watches or more expensive watches, and I'm certainly going to do that if I'm spending Grail watch money. But strangely enough, I've started to get closer to that financial goal again in such a short period of time. I obviously must be having some issues with watches because I seem to be getting more and more comfortable spending more and more on watches. But I'm aware of that and I'm being mindful of it and I'm not being silly about it, but I'm still doing it. So I was getting basically back to this point of I could almost afford this watch again, or at least in the nearish future, I may be able to afford this watch again. So I did exactly what I do in these circumstances. I stood back from that purchasing decision and I started to look elsewhere to see, is there anything else in this price range that I would prefer to actually buy for myself? And I also did something which I've learned about, and something that I try to implement when I'm looking at watches, is I look in back catalogues of other brands, I look at wide selections of watches, and I try not to limit myself. And when I did that, and when I started looking at a particular brand, I came across a watch. I came across a watch that was not cheap, but it was in the price range that I was looking at spending on that Grand Seiko. And in fact, it was actually a little bit less, so that was a bit of a benefit, but it was a watch that captured my attention so much that I kept going back to it. And I just bought it. And it's just arrived. And I want to share with you what it is that I bought. So here we have a very, very large box from IWC. And this one here is the IWC IW325401. Look at the amount of space on the side of this. This even lifts up and there's some bits and pieces under here, which is kind of cool. But of course, I didn't buy this expensive watch for a box. I bought it for this amazing looking vintage inspired watch. Now this one here, it was released back in 2009 and it was a bit of a run for a few years. They released it in the stainless steel, which is obviously the one I bought, and they also released it in gold, and I think they also released it in a limited release of platinum. So this is probably not the obvious IWC watch to buy. This is one of their sort of vintage releases or the vintage reissues. A lot of watch brands have been doing this over the years, and sort of IWC was doing a few different vintage reissues at this time. But I really love pilot watches, as you may know if you've watched my channel before, and I'm also a really big fan of vintage watches. So a vintage inspired pilot watch from a brand that I really love is definitely going to tick some boxes for me. And the thing that really stood out to me as soon as I opened the box of this one is just how beautiful this bezel moves. There's no clicking, no bumping. It's sort of like a friction bezel, but it is so smooth that it is absolutely incredible. Obviously these beautiful sort of vintage inspired hands, sub-second registry, and when you turn it over, you'll see that it is powered by the manual winding 98300 movement, with a 46-hour power reserve. And there's a huge amount of decoration going on inside there as well, which is really nice. Manual wind only, suits this vintage style watch, has a lovely manual wind function, feels very nice. But if you haven't already noticed, this is a rather big watch. In fact, it is 44 millimeters and it's around about 53 millimeters lug to lug, and I only have a 17 centimeter wrist, so that really worried me. But I don't mind bigger watches if it suits the specific watch, and this sort of style of watch, I am very comfortable having a bigger watch, but it still needs to fit within the size of my wrist. And I think it actually does that. Only just, it sort of fits in. When you're looking straight down, you can still see part of my arm above and below, but because it sits down on wrist so well, it feels really nice. If this was an automatic watch and it was sitting quite tall, it probably might feel a little bit big, but because it's not, it is absolutely lovely on wrist. Comes on a nice leather strap as well, which you would hope for at this sort of price. Very, very nice, very, very comfortable, very, very soft, but I just am enjoying looking at that movement. But then just wearing this beautiful watch. Has some different sort of polishing and brushing. There's a sort of vertical brushing there across the sides, horizontal down through there. And I just can't stop moving that bezel. It is a beautiful action. It's so smooth. And it's such a beautiful looking watch. So this is by far the most expensive watch that I've ever purchased. And also, it was an accidental purchase, or almost an accidental purchase. It was not the watch that I was planning to buy. It was one that I stumbled across whilst looking at other watches in this sort of price range, and I was just immediately attracted to it. I just wanted to own it. And now it is in my collection. So it'll be very interesting to see how this one goes in my collection. Obviously, if I'm spending these sorts of money on watches, I'm not planning to then resell them. But that doesn't always exactly happen. I'm going to keep this one on wrist for a very long time, but I'll probably revisit it at some point, because when I was looking to buy this particular watch, there weren't really that many great in-depth reviews online. And although it is an older watch, a lot of people are still buying second-hand watches, and it might be worthwhile having some good information and a good video about this one online for other people in the future if they look to buy one of these watches. So keep an eye out for that one in the future to revisit this one and give you a nice in-depth review of it. But whilst we wait for that one, there's a couple of other videos that you might want to check out.